Merci, thank you very much. I'm very honored to be speaking here tonight because I know as I look out at these people, as you are my hometown, I know I'm speaking to the cream. You are my peeps. We are the people who dedicate our lives to changing the world, and that's for sure. And I have to say, when Sarah Farid gave me a call and said, would I speak on artists as catalysts of social change, it was like, hello? You've been reading my diary. That's my entire life. So it seemed like a no-brainer to me, until I got here, of course. Just kidding. So, probably the central issue I'd like to talk to you about is being your authentic self. And this is a pretty good representation of me, in fact. Anyone who knows me well teases me a lot about, see, I live on a farm and I don't have to comb my hair every day. It's a real pleasure in life. But in fact, being your authentic self is a very political act, and that's what I want to talk about. I have a good friend in town here. A lot of you will know Jerry Atwell, a very gifted musician and playwright. And you know what it's like in the world when those who are in power create chaos to instill fear in us so that they can have more control over us. It's always the artists that step forward. And the day that Trump got elected, on Facebook, Jerry posted, artists, you know what to do. Because that's who we are. That's, for me, as an artist, that's my responsibility. So I thought a lot about, after 45 years of singing all over the world, what I thought music was. And this is what I posted on my website, because I believe that music is the crucible that cradles and nurtures our culture's emotions. And it reflects that back to us. It protects us. It cares for us in that kind of way. And that's a very political act. I teach a course called The Art of Managing Your Career here in Manitoba. And one of the things that I always talk to my students about is that I believe that being an artist takes a great deal of courage. Because everyone is an artist. I think the line comes when you decide to have the courage to just really put yourself out there. Because to be a really authentic artist, you have to put yourself out there. And that's where your power lies. So, that's how we change the world. I remember one of the first songs I wrote that ended up being a very popular song. Right after I'd written it, I called Connie Calder and I sang it to her over the phone. We're really close friends and she's my touchstone for music. And I said, you know, I really like this song, but I don't think I'll do it publicly because it's way too personal. And she said, you're so wrong. Because on the contrary, when you cut to the bone and when you really, really provide that insight into yourself, then that touches the hearts of others. And that's where we have to go as artists. And above all, as artists, we are storytellers. And I have to say, no matter what else I've been called, and I've been called a lot of things, but I have been a storyteller. And I like to think of it, you know, like in the old days when I'm sorry, I'm not trying to ignore you, you're just sort of over here, hi. Being the bard, and more than ever these days, we need the bards who go along and tell us the truth about what's happening. I've actually stopped listening to the news. I decided it's just designed to scare me half to death and not tell me the truth. Who I want to listen to are our artists. So I believe that we all have a story. And it's really important that we share that story. Because if we don't share our stories, then we start believing in difference. And when we believe in difference, that fosters fear. And it's designed to do that, right? When I talk to people who start talking to me about, perhaps they have a racist idea, and I really talk to them about where that's coming from, inevitably it always comes from, well, they look different than me. I'm afraid of them. If you could really get people to say, where does this come from? Why are you afraid? I live about 5 miles from Emerson, where the people have been coming across the border. Remember in the dead of winter and that poor man lost all his fingers? And so in my neighborhood, I'm living with those dynamics all the time, and I like to talk to those people. In fact, one of the really cool things that happened to me recently is I have a friend who is Dakota, and last spring she said to me, Heather, I've had a vision. And the vision is, she's a sun dancer, her husband is a sun dancer. He's told me recently he's done something like 50 sun dances in his life. And she said, my vision is that we need to have a women's sun dance. In my little pea brain, the first thing I saw was, cool, it's going to be on my land. And then I said to her, so where's it going to be? And she said, well, it'll be on my home reserve, of course. I said, oh yeah, of course, that's great. So then about 4 weeks before the sun dance is going to happen, I get an email from her, and as I was reading it, I could tell that her heart was on the ground, and she said, our band has just told us we can't have the sun dance on our home reserve because it's a women's sun dance. She said, do you know anywhere we could have it? I got 320 acres, how much do you need? So in fact, the sun dance did happen on my land. And the really cool thing about it was, it put dealing with racism where it belongs, on my shoulders. Because I was the one that had to go to talk to all my neighbors. I had to find a guy to bring the wood, somebody else to bring the water, and when it was going on, the drums could be heard for miles around us, so my neighbors are asking about it, and I'm talking to them about it. And it's wonderful, because then I get to be that bridge. And having this within my community like that allowed my white neighbors to experience the First Nations culture in a way that they hadn't done before. One of the women who came out to work on before it happened, she came out to the land, and it had been raining, so the ground was kind of wet, and she went out there in her little minivan and got stuck. So I went out with my little tractor, but I couldn't pull her out, it wasn't enough, so I went and got my neighbor, and it was a Sunday. And my nearest neighbor is Mennonite, very strict Mennonite, and I'm like, oh no. So I go over there, I buy eggs from these people, I've been building a relationship with them, so I went over there and I said, please forgive me, I know this is a Sunday, but there's some people on my land and this lady got stuck and we need some help. So Dick, who's always kind of a grumpy kind of guy, he goes, okay, put on my overalls. He was in his, I'd never seen him so nicely dressed. It was Sunday. So he puts on his overalls, he shows up about 10 minutes later, jumps off his tractor, which is made mine look like a dinky toy, jumped off his tractor, went over to her and went, well, you sure got yourself in a pickle, didn't you? And I'm thinking, okay, we're off to a good start, this is great. So after he pulls her out, then he takes me aside and he starts asking me what's going on. So I'm thinking, okay. So I start telling him the story, and I'm watching him like a hawk to see what's his reaction going to be like. And after I finish the story about, because he's going, well, what is a sun dance and why are they having it? And so I explain the whole thing, and then he goes, well, good, things are going back to the way they used to be. Yes, it's perfect. So when we share those stories, we break down that fear of difference, and I think that that's what's so essential. And then we can begin to celebrate our sameness, right? So for me, diversity, in my life, I have been so blessed with diversity, partly because of how much I've traveled, partly because the First Nations community welcomed me as a member of that community about 30 years ago, and it changed my life absolutely. Every time diversity comes into my life, I found myself often I'll be the only hearing person in a whole room of deaf people. Whenever I'm the only one in a room of other, I feel so blessed, because I know I'm going to come away having learned a lot. So for example, when I'm in a situation where there's a whole bunch of women and like 1 or 2 men, I want to go up to that guy and say, congratulations, are you ever smart? Are you ever smart to be here? So we can celebrate our diversity and jettison the fear, because the fear just dupes us into fighting each other instead of fighting the forces we should be fighting, instead of being a united front. So, the one simple, brave, and powerful thing I did in my life is tell my story. I've done a lot of things. I was involved in the trade union movement, I was involved in the left, I've been involved in the women's movement, the environment, just you name it all, I've been involved in it. But what it came down to in the end was simply telling my story was the most political thing I ever did. And one of the things I never realized was, because I was a children's performer as well as an adult performer, I didn't think that through, that those kids are going to grow up. And so I have now sung to 2 generations that are adults now who grew up on Heather's Bishop's music, and when they grew up they thought, she's cool, no matter what anybody else had to say about me. And I didn't realize what a radical thing that would end up being over the decades. So I simply told my story to the world long before the world wanted to hear my story. Hi, I'm a lesbian, and this is what we look like. We're your mothers, we're your daughters, we're your sisters, we're you, we're your family. And I've had people spit on me, walk out of audiences, you know, all those kinds of things, take their children away from me. There are children's festivals that wouldn't hire me, but can I say, for all those children's festivals that hired me all those years, because I started in the 70s when they were still putting us in jail. They were still taking away our children. They were still, the police were still beating us. They were still giving us shock treatments. And what I started doing in the early 70s actually is going and talking to the police, saying, come on, why do you want to beat me up? I went to the university and talked to psychology students and said, really, do you think you've got to give me shock treatments to change who I am? Like, come on, you guys. And the whole thing was always just letting them see one and talk to one and relate to it so that they could actually learn something from that experience. And one of the cool things I learned about standing up and telling my story, and I have a nun, my own nun. She wanted to live in the country, so she came to live with me for 3 months and stayed for 2 years. It was awesome. But one of the things she would say to me, I'd come home sometimes feeling kind of broken, and she'd say, you got to remember that the tall trees catch the most wind. And the neat thing about that is when I have caught a lot of wind, it has allowed people who perhaps would not have stood up and spoken out to do that. I can remember the first time the Winnipeg Sun took a run at me. I was nominated for a Juno. So the Winnipeg, there were articles in both papers. The Winnipeg Sun the title of the piece was, Heather Bishop sings in a sexy, sultry voice to children. I wept. I was so upset. But then I turned around and I went and met the guy. I went into his office, I closed the door, he got up, opened the door. It's fear. I reiterated, I mean, look at me, I'm tiny. It's fear. So, but what happened, and this is before the internet, when that article came out, all of a sudden the Winnipeg Sun was inundated with letters from people just complaining about this article, and I was like, okay, I don't mind catching the big wins if it means that everybody else gets to stand up and go. It's like when Oka happened. As white people, that allowed us to go, wait a minute. You do not speak for me when you do this thing. So, I'm going to give you just a little bit of my story, since that's what I'm saying we ought to be doing. I started out as a creative person, and when I had my chart done, I was told that if I wasn't creative, I'd die, and I clearly recognize that. So I'm forever being creative in whatever method is at hand. I got a fine arts degree in the 60s from the University of Regina, which was a hotbed of political activity at the time. It was really great. And this is the first painting I did that made me think that, yes, indeed, I was going to be a painter. And then in 1978, I had already started into my musical career, and it started to take off. At the time, I had just finished teaching the first pre-trades training for women course in this country. And now, of course, we have all kinds of women trades people. And so I left my easel to become a musician because I decided that being a visual artist, I would never make any money at all. So well, I thought I'd become a musician. What was I thinking? But no, I'm kidding. We make tens and tens of dollars. Don't let anybody tell you different. And then I spent the next 45 years touring the world, telling stories. And the very first time I went on stage as a solo artist, I had decided that if I was going to do this, I was going to do what those musicians who really moved me did. And what they did is they told me about their lives. And in particular, in my teens, I grew up in Nina Simone and Buffy St. Marie. These were women who were talking about the racism in their lives. And I was this little white girl in Regina. I learned so much from listening to their music. So I went, okay, if I'm going to be a musician, that's the kind of musician I'm going to be. And then I thought, uh-oh, I'm a lesbian. This career will last about 5 minutes. So my very first gig was at the Regina Folk Festival. I was playing the main stage, so it was a huge room, big crowd. My grandmother was there. I sang grandmother's song. She stood up afterwards, turned to the crowd, waved. And then about 2/3 of the way through, I did my lesbian song, expecting that that would be the end of it. At the end of my set, I got a standing ovation, and I couldn't believe it. I nearly fell over. And from that point on, every gig to me was just like, wow, another one? Which really saved me in a way from having any kind of... In our business, you can get jaded, as it were, like, well, how come I'm not famous? You know, as if you have a right to be famous. But what it allowed me to do was take every one as a blessing. Every opportunity I had to go out and sing again and talk to people was a blessing. And then about 30 years into my career, I started painting again. I had promised myself I would do that, and so I think I was in my mid-50s when I decided I would go back and start painting again. So I did, and I'll just show you a few of those. And each painting is a story, which I'm not going to bore you with, but each of these people have a story. And when I paint them, I try to capture that story. For example, this guy, I was in Mexico. He was one of 3 musicians who were playing to all the tourists on the beach, right? And so these guys are walking around in their shoes and socks, and they're those polyester shirts that like are so hot. And they're carrying, one guy was carrying a big double bass, and they go from blanket to blanket, and they stop, and they play their music. And they play instruments where my colleagues wouldn't even pick that instrument up, and they're playing these broken down old instruments, and they're making incredible music. Incredible. They go to a blanket full of Mexican people. Those people would be like, yahoo, and singing along, and the party's happening, right? And then they go to a blanket of white people from Canada. We're Canadians, right? So I had to, and this is part of a three series paintings, because for me, these guys were the real symphony, because they were doing the music of the people. And I've started a new series I call Guardians of the Light. These are very large paintings, as you can see. And these are First Nations peoples from Mexico. As I said, I think creativity comes in all forms. So for me, for example, if somebody's willing to buy me a pile of lumber, I'll build you something, because I love building. It's a wonderful creative thing. And interestingly, a lot of musicians are also carpenters. It requires the engaging of the left and right brain at the same time. It's really cool. It's a very neat thing. So I became a carpenter. My father and grandfather are both master carpenters, and luckily for me, when I was just a little girl, as soon as I was old enough and tall enough to reach over a table saw, and I expressed to my dad that I really wanted to learn, bless him, because it was the 50s, he taught me. And at the time, I just took it for granted, and then I realized, you know, by the time I was a teenager, like, that my father was very different than most fathers. In 1979, I built this passive solar home. About 15 years ago, I built a straw bale studio in the woods. This building is 20 by 20, so it's 400 square feet. It cost about $5,000 to build. It's a beautiful little building. And my 1949 Ferguson tractor. I love that tractor. And just recently, I participated in Manitoba Hydro's, what do they call it, Smart Energy program, where they rebate you for almost 1/3 of the cost to install solar energy. So I did that this winter. And now not only is my house powered, heated by the sun, but also all my power now, it powers my house and a second house I have on the land, and I'm still selling power back to hydro. So if you've been like thinking about it, trust me, go for it. It's fabulous. And then this summer, or how I spent my summer vacation, that's 20 feet in the air, installing the trusses on a studio that I'm just finishing building. I'll be going home tonight actually to start wiring it. So, this is my point to you. Everyone is a creative person. Each of you are creative. And it's really important that we understand that we create our own reality every moment. When I'm talking to my students, and always my students see it in the future, you know, like when I become an artist, and I say no. If you think you want to be an artist, then act as if you're already an artist, and guess what? You will be. This is it, this moment. You're living the dream right now. It's not 40 years from now, it's right now. This is it. So remember that, and you're creating that every day. You're responsible for that. And so when I started out as an activist, the very first question I had was, says who? And who are they? Anyway, who are they to say that there's something wrong with me? I was speaking with Farron about this recently. We just did a show in Vancouver. And she said, you know, I finally figured it out. I said, yeah, me too. They don't know what they're doing. It's a really well-kept secret. They don't know what they're doing. And we continually abdicate our power to them because we say, oh, you must know what you're doing. No, they don't. And you know what makes leaders? Somebody who goes, somebody should do this. And there's nobody else standing there but you, so you do it. And then suddenly you've got people coming along behind. But in order to tell your story, and in order to do that, the very first thing you have to do is discover what it is and share it. And hypnotherapy was a great tool for me to unearth a lot about what my story really is. You know, I thought I knew what it was, and then when I hit my 60s, I started to really discover what my story was. And it was far richer than I ever understood. And before I leave this, I want to say, the thing about telling your stories too, how many of you wish that your parents or your grandparents or people in your family that have gone on ahead of you would have told you their story? How much do you wish you knew about the truth about their lives? And so when you're reticent about telling the truth to those you love, remember how much you would have loved having the truth told to you. So it starts with the question we all ask, why am I here again? See, I believe that we made a pact with our spirit guides before we came here about what we came to learn. And then the trick is you get here and you forgot, right? They wipe your memory. And so you have to get it on your own, right? And so you spend your whole life. And I try to remember and remind myself when stuff gets really hard that it means I'm facing that lesson I came here to learn. And if I don't get it this time, I don't want to come back and have to do it again. So I would rather put my head down, get into the lesson, and learn it and change and grow in the way that I can. Always remembering that we create our own reality every moment of every day. And I love to say to people when whether I'm singing or speaking, it's your car. Don't give the keys to somebody else. Because we tend to do that, right? Don't do it. You're the one driving the car. And if it's going down the wrong road, you're the one who put you on that road. So take a different street. Because you're the one in the driver's seat. Remember that. Don't ever abdicate that responsibility. This is your creative masterpiece. This life you've been given. So plan on being awesome and then act as if you are. because you are. And I reiterate, the blame game. It took me years to really understand the blame game. It's so much easier to go, well, they did that. They made me do this. It's your fault I'm acting this way. It's your fault I'm not happy. It's your fault, it's your fault. The blame game only separates you from yourself, and you never get anywhere. If it's not working out, you change it. As long as we keep blaming, we disempower ourselves. I have a friend, well, I have a couple of friends. One of my friends is a real healer. She's a reflexologist, among many other magical things that she can do. And I had another friend out for dinner, and so my friend, the reflexologist, was doing her feet, and she said to her afterwards about, you know, okay, this and this and this is going on in your body, and so, you know, if you change your diet in this way, then don't worry, your body will heal itself. And the other woman went, you mean it's up to me? Indeed, it is up to you. The original wound. And that's what we're here to heal. Because we are not separate from the Creator. We are not. Happiness is a choice that you make. And I check in with myself often, and if I'm like, it's like, okay, why aren't you happy? And whose responsibility is to change it? It's mine. The victim thing. We live in a world that encourages us to be victims. And in particular, nothing drives me crazier than the news. When something tragic happens in somebody's life, the first thing they want to do is stick a microphone in that person's face, preferably they're crying and falling apart, and then put a clip of it on the radio. Do they put clips on the radio of people celebrating the beauty of life? No. They want to find somebody who's absolutely devastated. What's wrong with our news? Let's shake that up and change that altogether. Let's start a whole new news network that's only about the good stories. Ivan and Pablo and me, we're going to take care of that. When I talk to my students about writing a vision statement about why you're here, for example, and I start thinking about myself, okay, why am I here? Okay, if I look at my life and how I've lived it, I came here to rock this life. And I intend to rock it right to the end. And this is the truth. If I hadn't done that, the world would have changed me. And I could not have the world change me. I needed the world to change. Because I knew, from a little girl, I knew there was nothing wrong with me. So when you can't control what's happening, challenge yourself to control the way that you respond to what's happening. That's where your real power lies. And this is what I've learned about how you might do that. When I change myself, I change the world. For years, for decades, in fact, I was always pushing out there, and indeed, a lot of things changed. I never thought, you know, when you first start, you know, when feminism, I was involved in the trade union movement, I was involved in the left, and then in the mid-60s, the second wave of feminism came along, and I was like, yes! And then I thought, great, the world will change in 5 minutes. You know, and then a decade later, you're kind of like, oh, is it ever going to change? Is it ever going to change? But I do want to remind, especially the young people here, I've lived long enough to see massive changes. We have gay marriage in Canada. In my lifetime, I went from being spit upon and jailed and beaten and given shock treatments to getting the Order of Canada. That's phenomenal change. I can only change myself. How many years did I spend in relationships trying to change my partner. Yeah, right, that'll work. So when I finally stopped trying to change her and changed me, it worked. Surprise, surprise. So this is what I've learned about how you might do that. Judgment. And suspending judgment is really important because, first of all, as hard as we judge outside of ourselves, you know that we judge ourselves even more stringently. And so it's really important that you suspend that judgment, because the chances are the judgment that you're laying on yourself or someone else wasn't yours anyway. It came from somewhere else. Your judgment that that person is different and therefore less than or whatever, that wasn't your idea as a child. That's why I love children. Children don't come with that. Hi, want to play? Can't we go into the world with, hi, want to play? And when you get to know your true self, think of it like you're making a new friend, because you are getting to know yourself, devoid of all that garbage that has been put on you to make you think differently about yourself and the world. And when you look at yourself and you find something, you go, ooh, find it interesting. That's where we trip up. I used to trip up on it anyway, where I would find myself reacting in a way or doing something. It's like, oh, Heather. And then I would just judge myself, and guess what? I never went any further than the, oh, Heather. But once I suspended judgment and went to, well, that's interesting that you think that. Where did that come from? Says who? And who are they? And etc. Then I was able to move and change that notion, because I wasn't shrouding it in judgment. And that's how you begin to discover who you really are. It's really important not to believe everything you think. Really, really, really essential. Because again, chances are a lot of things you think weren't your ideas in the first place. Check them out. Look at them. Is this true? Suspend disbelief. I love that one. Because in particular, when I'm working with people using hypnotherapy, that's the first thing is, just for 15 minutes, why don't you just pretend? Why not? Because then when you suspend disbelief, it allows you to entertain new belief systems. And the way we really change ourselves and therefore change the world is when we change those belief systems that we live in. A belief system that says, if you're homosexual, you are not worthy, or you're less than dirt, or whatever. I like dirt. Let someone else have their weather without getting wet. So, and this is something I try to practice on a daily basis. If somebody's up in my face screaming at me, where I used to be like, oh, no, I'm a bad person, it's like, whoa, you got a lot of anger. Wonder where that comes from, right? Because it's not mine. It's not mine. It's yours. And that's interesting that you're so angry about that. Or that's interesting that you're so, I don't make you. That's interesting. Love yourself. I mean, seriously. Love yourself. This is an incredible life each of us have been given. And you have to set up healthy boundaries. Boundaries that are not in service to the ego. And as you get older, this becomes more relevant. I know, looking at some of the older people, love your avatar. It's the one you chose. It's the one you've been given for this time on the planet. And if you take really good care of it, it will take care of you. Whether you believe you can or you can't, you're right. It's really important to understand that. If you go, I can't do this, you're right. If you tell me you can do it, you're right. because you will. Try a different street. Take your car down a different road. So, how to be the creator of your ultimate masterpiece? Always asks, says who? What do you mean there's no fairies? I'm sure I saw one out in my garden the other day. And why not? Seriously, why not? A lot of the things I've built and created, it's like, why not? In fact, little kids who know me go, I have one little nephew who calls me Super Hefo. Hefo can fix anything. Because I believe I can. When my father taught me how to be a carpenter, the biggest gift he gave me was, you can. Didn't matter that it was carpentry, it applied to life. You can. I can, really? And I have. So reframe your belief systems. And then it opens up all the doors and windows of your time here. And be brave enough to take a look at why you're not having the life you want. And if that's the case, ask yourself, how is it possible that I don't already have the life I want? Ask that question seriously and listen to yourself, and you'll get the answer. And then change it. You have a canvas in front of you that's your life. And it's magnificent. I like to see myself as a forever student. When I retired from music, I started doing a whole bunch of other things, and it's really true what they say, you retire and suddenly you're busier than you ever were. Actually, I retired and this amazing thing happened. It's probably not that surprising to all of you, but this thing called a pension happened for me. And I have to tell you, I always used to think, you know, when you get a pension, you're a pensioner and you're on a fixed income. And my pension check started coming. It's like, woohoo! For the first time in my life, I have money. It's, you know, for a musician, that was unbelievable that this check comes every month. Now, I can afford to go back on the road till the money runs out. It's perfect. Wisdom is memory with no emotional attachment. Detach from that, and that's where you become wise. When you still get hooked up in the emotion of it, it's not an accurate assessment of what happened. So dare to be yourself, please. When I was talking to my teacher, after I'd studied hypnotherapy for about 7 years, and I said, you know, John, I get asked to do these speeches and these keynote addresses, and I really feel like I have nothing to say that people don't already know. And he said, you're right. But the point is, we need to remind each other of these things now and again. And we need to talk about them now and again. And that's your job. So, I have been very honored then to speak to you because I know you know all of this. And if I could leave you with one thing, it would be this. How could anyone ever tell you you're anything less than beautiful? How could anyone ever tell you you're less than whole? How could anyone fail to notice your loving is a miracle? How deeply you're connected to my soul. And as I see you here before me, you're absolutely beautiful. As I see you here before me, you're completely whole. As I see you here before me, your loving is a miracle. How deeply we're connected to the whole. So know that in your being you are absolutely beautiful. And know that in your being you're completely whole. Know that in your being your loving is a miracle. How deeply we're connected to the whole. Bless you and take care of your precious selves. Thank you so much.